Welcome everyone to the Oregon Trails Funding and Assistance Opportunities webinar. I'm Steph Noll with the Oregon Trails Coalition, and I'll be moderating today's session along with sharing some additional opportunities not covered by today's presenters. Today's presenters would love for attendees to introduce yourselves in the chat. And if you want to choose your settings so that you are able to share your chat with both presenters and attendees, I always think it's fun for other folks to have a little bit of an idea of who else is attending as well. So please feel invited to introduce yourself in the chat, share your organization or what part of Oregon or outside of Oregon you're tuning in from today. It's fun to know who's joining us. Attendees are on listen only mode during today's webinar, but you are welcome to submit questions in the chat or using the Q&A feature, whatever is more comfortable or easier for you to use, and we'll be keeping an eye on that. For the most part, we'll be answering questions in a general Q&A period at the end of the webinar, but we might flag a few as we go. We are planning to wrap up all of our presentations at or before 1, but most of us are able to stay on the line a little bit after that to continue a Q&A today. And also today's webinar is being recorded, and we will share that on the Oregon Trails Coalition blog. So if you get pulled away or there's something you want to go back to or you want to share with a colleague, we should have it up by the end of this week on our blog. And I think that is most of the housekeeping I want to cover. If you have a question just about Zoom or about how just kind of to access what's happening today, hopefully one of us can help you out in the chat for that as well. I want to extend my gratitude to all of today's presenters. We're going to have kind of a rapid fire kind of introduction to a lot of different trail programs today, but these are all friendly folks. So if you have follow-up questions, we'll all hopefully help you learn what you want to know. And I'm going to start off today, before we go to our presenters, by sharing some resources available on the Oregon Trails Coalition website. This graphic is from our Ready, Set, Plan introductory guide to trail planning and development that we published last year. And I wanted to start today's webinar by just acknowledging all of the work that goes into developing trails and all of the phases of trail development that require resource and expertise. And if you feel like you're someone who is newer to navigating the territory of trail planning and development, I want you to invite you to check out our guide online because you are who we made it for. And Jodi's going to post a link in the chat for us there. And our trail planning guide does have a short chapter on funding. And I wanted to flag that it talks about kind of all these questions that you might want to ask yourself as part of the trail planning process that relate to funding. And there's also a short chapter around making the case about kind of all of the value or benefits your trail will bring to your community, and really thinking a lot about the desire or about all of the benefits and values of your trail can really be a great tool for matching it with the right kind of funding. And I wanted to flag that there's a appendix of resources in the Ready, Set, Plan guide that includes some great links to resources developed by groups like American Trails and Rails to Trails Conservancy that include some formulas or calculators for kind of trying to estimate what the health benefits or economic benefits of your trail project might be. There's also a link to the recent economic impact study of outdoor recreation in Oregon that can give you some kind of county specific information of values of outdoor recreation in your area. So please take a look at that guide for resources that can help you as you pursue funding. Also, before we jump into our presentations, I wanted to flag a couple of opportunities that are related specifically to the planning phase of trails. One is the Transportation Growth Management Planning Grants Program. And this is more for folks who are looking at trails that are part of active transportation systems. There'll be more information on their website with a new application process opening up this spring for 2022. But especially if you're working on kind of a trails system kind of master planning effort, definitely check out this program because it really is planning specific funding, which is a very rare thing in trails world. I also wanted to flag the River Trails and Conservation Assistance Program through the National Park Service. And this is a kind of all lands program. It's not specific to national parks in any way. You can access this program for local projects of all varieties. And it's not a funding program, but they do provide pro bono technical assistance to support planning and outreach and kind of project development. And they have a round happening in 2022, and the deadline is March 1st. They're really friendly, helpful folks, and they highly recommend that you give them a call before you submit an application to just talk through your ideas and make sure your program is a good fit. Also, while today, many of the programs covered today do have eligibility for projects on federal lands, I wanted to flag two opportunities. One, I just wanted to flag that if you're looking at a project on Bureau of Land Management, managed lands, there's a grant opportunity open through February 21st. So not much more time left on that, but if you're already talking to your local BLM staff about a project, a trails project, want to make sure that's on your radar. And then we're going to be doing a deeper dive into funding for trails on federal lands in a webinar on March 9th. And that will cover not just grant opportunities, but the different colors of funding that our federal land managers are employing to do work on trails, or that they could be employing to do work on trails. And so we're hoping to share some of that color of funding vocabulary with you in March to make it easier to have conversations, whether you are whether you work for the Forest Service or whether you're a partner working with the Forest Service, where you can talk about local priorities, regional priorities together and identify what kind of federal funding might work to make that project a reality. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter, Jodi Bellefuille, to share about OPRD grant programs. I'm going to pass it off to Jodi.
Great, thank you, Steph. Just going to get my screen up here. And thanks to everybody for attending. It's so great to see so many familiar as well as new to me names in the audience. So I'm Jodi Bellefuille. I am a grant program coordinator at the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. And I'm just going to give an overview of the different grant programs that our department offers. It looks like some of you have probably seen me give this presentation in recent years. So nothing big changing that I'll go over, but I will be going over some of our new grant cycle dates and funding amounts, etc. So these are the 5 different grant programs that the Department of Oregon, or the Oregon Department of Parks and Rec manages. These fund trails as well as other outdoor recreation facilities statewide. So I'm just going to give a brief overview today of each of these programs. And Steph will be dropping a link to our website where you can drill down further into each of our programs' web pages, find all the program specific information you need, as well as contact information for the different staff that you see listed on the screen here. And I also want to highlight the photo on the right here. This is a new trail around Ford's Pond in the city of Sutherland. And a good example of an applicant using 3 of our different programs recently to build out these facilities, in different phases as well as match each other. So the first phase of this project was to build the first loop or first half of the loop around the trail, which is out there now. And the city used both the Recreation Trails program and the local government grant program to match each other, as well as some local funds to build out that first phase of the project. Then they used some of their own funding to match another local government grant program to install a restroom building, as well as some other facilities like picnic and bird watching shaded shelters. And then they're using RTP and the Land and Water Conservation Fund program to match each other to build out the rest of this loop. So it can be a little bit challenging to sort of balance all of our different programs or different requirements and different schedules, but it can also be a really great success and a really good way to invest in your community. So these are just some general requirements that apply to our programs. And then specific policies for each program does vary just due to the funding sources and any associated rules or laws around those. So first off, funding is competitive. It's especially competitive for the Recreation Trails program and the local government grant program. So just know that if you're not successful on your first go around, you can always come back to our programs and we'll give you feedback on maybe other things you can highlight or change when you come back. These are all reimbursement-based programs, so we staff, we review and pay out expenses as you implement your project versus handing over a check up front. All programs require a match. So the amount of match does vary by program, but it's not just cash match. Depending on your project scope, we have guidelines on how you can count other contributions to your project, like volunteer labor or staff time, or the use of equipment and things like that. So there is ways to get creative with coming up with your match for your project. And in general, you have 2 years to complete your project. The types of projects that we fund include land acquisition for trail or park development, development of trails, heavy restoration of trails, and then our ATV program that I'll touch on is the only program that we have that just funds ongoing maintenance and associated staff costs with that. The applicant eligibility does vary by each program, and I'll go over that in the next slides. And then as far as who makes the decisions for which projects get funded each year is our committees. Each program has its own committee. They review the project applications after we as staff do a review and score these proposals along each program's guidelines, and then they're ultimately making the recommendations to our department's commission on which projects we fund each year. And also, projects must be on public land that's accessible to the general public. And the amount of time it has to be accessible, it does vary by program. So we have some programs that require that that land is dedicated to recreation in perpetuity or forever. But then we have RTP that requires 25 years at minimum for public access. So that would mean if you have an easement over private land, it would have to be for at least 25 years. And then in general, we don't offer many funding opportunities for project planning. I will touch on a couple exceptions to that, but in general, your project should be shovel ready or at least close to that when you come to apply. But we do have some allowance for final engineering or permitting costs as part of your project and things like that. And then as far as navigating our programs, we each have our own webpage that has a policy manual available and information about our upcoming grant cycles. We all hold, or most of us hold workshops or webinars at the beginning of our grant cycle just to go over our program requirements in much greater detail. And you can always go to our website and watch the previous workshop. Things largely don't change too much from cycle to cycle. So if you're somebody who loves doing your homework well in advance, you can always check out past recorded webinars. Otherwise, just wait for our cycle to open to check those out. We use an online application system that you apply to or apply through, and then use that website as well to manage your grant. So there, you do need an account to use that website, but there's no need to request an account until you're ready to apply, unless you need to access past records from your agency. And then, as I've indicated, our grant cycle schedules are different for each program, but I'll go over those. But the biggest takeaway is just that we are all here and happy to help you navigate these programs. You can find our phone numbers and email addresses on our website, and we all make plenty of time to help folks navigate the application process or talk through which program might be a good fit for your project. So the first program I'll go over is the Recreational Trails program that I work with. Or this is a federally funded program, and Oregon receives about $1.5 million per year, and we run an annual grant cycle. 30% of those funds are set aside for motorized trail projects, that'd be OHV and snowmobile trails, and the rest is for non-motorized trails, including water trails or paddling trails. There is a 20% match required for RTP. We have a $10,000 minimum request amount. And on the non-motorized side of things, we have a recommended maximum of $150,000, but no max on the motorized side of things at this point. The most common types of projects that we fund through RTP are construction of new trails, heavy restoration or expansion or improvement of existing trails, and then development or improvement of trailheads. We also have some limitations and some other options of types of projects you can apply to that's detailed in the manual, but those include safety and education programming for users, land acquisition for trail development, equipment, and accessibility or maintenance assessments for a whole trail system or park system. And this program is open to all types of public agencies, so local, state, federal, and tribal governments. And then nonprofits can also apply. So to be eligible as a nonprofit, you do have to be registered with the Secretary of State as a nonprofit for at least 3 years prior to application. But we've had some great projects that we've granted funds to a nonprofit, and they work closely with the land manager to implement the project. And the photo on the right is an example of one of those. The National Forest Foundation was the applicant and received a grant to replace a big section of boardwalk around Trillium Lake. And this is a in-progress project. So the new boardwalk is not in yet, but they contracted with the Youth Corps to remove the existing boardwalk and do some other work. And so they're serving sort of the fiscal agent. In some cases, they're doing the direct contracting, but then also working with the National Forest to do things like engineering and other staffed oversight. And I'm always happy to chat through those decisions as far as who should apply, whether it's a nonprofit or a land manager, because there can be some nuance to that and some different pros and cons. The next grant cycle opens this September. If you've applied in recent years, you know that I've been opening every spring, but starting this year, we're gonna open in September, and I plan to continue that on an annual basis. And if you are selected for funding this upcoming cycle, you'd expect to receive a notice to proceed around springtime at the earliest of 2023, so next year. The next program I want to mention is the Land and Water Conservation Fund. This is another federally funded grant program that we administer. And Oregon receives about $4 million per year through the National Park Service. And then 60% of those funds are set aside for local governments and tribal governments. And then up to 40% of the funds are for state agency applicants. And this program requires a 50% match. And this program funds trails and all types of outdoor recreation facilities. So a lot more flexible as far as if you have a trail in a park and also want to install a playground or some other dog parks or other facilities like that. It funds a wide variety of things. And as indicated, as far as the funding goes, it's open to local, state, and tribal governments. Important thing to know about this program is that once you use land and water funds in a park or a trail system, those funds or that park boundary is dedicated to recreation in perpetuity, which is a great thing as far as securing land for recreation and ensuring that it stays that way. But it can get a little complicated if there's any changes to that park or trail boundary. And I'm going to try and zoom in. Whoops, I'm going to go back. Bear with me here. So I wanted to show this example just to show you what that means. So this is the Bear Creek Greenway used LWCF funds long ago on different segments. And so this longer line here shows that the boundary of that section of Bear Creek Greenway near Talent, as well as some parks along it, those are dedicated for recreation. So as you can see too, there's 2 major roads or highways that run alongside that. So over the years, as roads have need to change or they need to close or reroute the trail, that can get pretty complicated administratively as far as making up for any loss in land with other land that can be dedicated towards recreation. So I guess the short message is get a hold of our grant coordinator early on if you're thinking of applying for a project, so that she can work with you to see if it'd be a good fit. Because if you have a park that's already used land and water, that's a great and easy fit to continue investing in that park with land and water. Or if you have a new property that you do want to dedicate to recreation, can also be a great fit. But those long trails can get a little complicated. And the next grant cycle for LWCF is expected to open this fall, and those dates will be announced soon. The next program is the local government grant program, and this one is open for application right now. There is $14 million available this year, which is a lot of money compared to previous cycles. And this one is like land and water, though, where it funds trails as well as all different types of outdoor recreation facilities. The application deadline does vary depending on the category that you're applying under, and the match requirement also varies depending on the population of the community that's applying. And those funding categories are small grants, those are up to $75,000, large grants up to $750,000 or $1 million if it's a land acquisition proposal. And then this is one of our programs that does fund planning, but this is more so like system-wide or updating a comprehensive master plan for a community, not necessarily planning a specific project. But if you have any questions about that, and are a smaller community, I believe, let me see if I left reference to this. I believe the population limit is 10,000 for a city, but you can check their website for what the limit is for those planning grants. This program is open to local governments, so cities, counties, park districts, and port districts. And it's open now, and so they're holding the webinar next week, and I believe Steph is gonna I think she is going to drop a link to the webinar registration form, and you can check that out next week or just check back on our website to watch a recording of it after the fact. Oh, and this photo here, I want to highlight this one. This is the Big Tree Trail in Rockaway Beach, or the Cedar Wetlands Preserve as it's called. RTP was able to fund the first phase of this, and then they applied separately to the local government grant program for the second phase. Then we have our ATV grant program. The big message to relay here is just that if you do manage OHV trails and you're not already connected to our ATV team, please reach out to them. And because they offer not just grant programs, but other safety and education resources and other training opportunities that could be beneficial to you. But as far as the grant program goes, they have about $11 million per biennium, or every 2 years. A small portion of funds, about 10%, is set aside for land acquisition, development, and planning. But then the majority of the funding is for operations and maintenance and law enforcement or emergency medical services for OHV riding areas. And they require a 20% match. And similar to RTP, this one is open to all types of governments, so local, state, federal, and tribal governments, as well as nonprofits. And the same requirement applies to ATV, where the nonprofit has to be registered for at least 3 years prior to applying. And they actually just yesterday made their committee met and made their recommendations for which projects to fund. And they plan to open again this coming fall, just for their operations and maintenance and law enforcement funding. And lastly, as far as our recreation grants go, we have the County Opportunity Grant Program. This is funded by RV registration fees. And this pot of that money is a competitive grant program for counties to apply to for improvements to county-run campgrounds. They have about $750,000 per year, and the match depends on the population of the county. And the reason I mention this one is because trails connected to these facilities or in these facilities could be eligible or at least supported by these campgrounds. So in the dunes, there are certain counties that have received grants to improve campgrounds that also serve as staging areas for OHV riding areas. or there's then little nature trails within a county campground, and those can be eligible for this program. And they will open again for application in August, with applications due in October of this year. And I also want to mention our heritage grant programs. In the department, we have our recreation grants unit, and we also have a heritage unit that manages 8 different grant programs. And some of these might overlap with your projects or other things that you manage, especially for local government agencies who have parks and I want to do interpretive signage or interpretive programs. This can be a good source of funding for that. So you can just go check out our website and drill down to these pages, or reach out to Curry Gill at our department, and she is wonderful and can walk you through all their different programs and how they might be able to support your recreation facilities. And then lastly, just want to mention too, we also have a lot of resources on our grant program pages. So even if you're not looking to apply now, you can visit our pages. We've got a lot of links to accessibility guidelines and resources, links to some of the same resources that Steph mentioned as part of the Ready, Set, Plan guide, as far as American Trails webinars and things like that. So definitely check that out if you want to learn more about all these great resources in the meantime. And with that, I will, unless we have any immediate questions, Steph, I will pass things on to Alan Thompson with ODOT.
We'll go ahead and pass it on to Alan, but just a reminder to folks, you can submit a question at any time, and I will share that we will be sharing the recorded webinar link on the Oregon Trails Coalition blog. It should be up by this Friday. And I'll get your slides up, Alan, while you get started.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alan Thompson. I'm the Oregon Community Pass Program Manager, and I'm here to talk to you about the next solicitation of the Oregon Community Pass Program. Next slide. And that's me. Hi. And I work on the, as I said, the Oregon Community Pass Program, and I also do some multimodal work. Next slide. So what we'll be discussing is what is the Oregon Community Pass Program, how it is funded, who's eligible, what types of projects are eligible, and the schedule for applying and awarding projects. Next slide, please. The Oregon Community Pass is a sort of new program. We are in the second cycle. The first cycle was in 2020 and 2021. We just awarded projects last year, and we're getting ready for the next one. It funds off-road active transportation. This is slightly different from Recreational Trails program, is that these have to have a transportation purpose. Next slide. It's a biennial competitive grant process. It supports investments in biking and walking that are off system, meaning that are primarily on or along a roadway, that are not on or along a roadway. There are several things that we're looking at. We're looking at critical links, which we categorize as first and last mile to destinations. It's connections to schools, downtown, shopping, transit, and other destinations. And it doesn't have to be a path going directly to, let's say, a hospital. It could be a path that connects to a bike lane or a sidewalk that then connects to a hospital. So we have these ways of working this to provide that non-motorized active transportation link to these destinations. The other one are regional paths. These are longer distance paths serving communities, for example, the Bear Creek Greenway, which was discussed earlier, or Portland Springwater Corridor. And we're also looking at roadway crossings because not everything is going to be off-road. So there we can have some crossings of roads, rivers, rail, and that closes the gaps in paths. Next slide. Here's an example of what we funded in 2021. We had $15.1 million available. Most of that was federal. And we had $105 million in the pre-application process in terms of projects. And then when we went to the applications themselves and weeded out the ones that were not eligible, we ended up with 57 applications worth $35 million. And then we were able to fund 21 projects for 15.1, and this map shows where they're all located. Next slide. Here's an example, is Astoria Riverwalk Lighting. This enables neighborhoods to connect to the employment centers around the Astoria Riverwalk and the area of big tourist destination. And by adding lighting to this, then it allows them to continue to commute in the darker hours over the winter. So it's a great way of getting an existing facility and have it last a longer time during the day. Next slide. This is another one of the Newburgh Dundee bypass. And because the bypass is there and they're looking at redeveloping some of the areas that are in between these two communities, the idea is to build a underpass, a bridge, and trail connecting these two sections, which will eventually be about 4 miles of connections between the communities. Next slide. So how is this funded? How are we able to do these fine, great things? Two funding sources. One is federally funded through the Transportation Alternatives Program. It's similar to what funds the OPRD. And the other one is a formula allocation, and it is the formula allocation to the state. And the other one is through the Multimodal Electric Transportation Fund. And that's a $15 bicycle tax on all new bicycles sold in the state, and a portion of the vehicle privilege tax. And that's limited to cash on hand. So that's the important part. Federal funding, we know because they allocate it, and then we know how much we're going to get, and we can start planning for it. But we can't do that with the state funding. And that'll come up for the next cycle. Next slide, please. What are the eligible projects? Projects that meet all of the following criteria. Now, this is a really long slide, but it's just straight out of the rules, and it's just easier to read it and say, this is what it is. It's a transportation project that is open to the public, so it can't be closed at night or during certain or on weekends. It assists in developing a multimodal transportation system that improves safety, improves the critical link regional path, as we discussed earlier. It will not rely on subsidies that the department for ongoing operations or maintenance. If the project is located on public property or within a public right-of-way, the project must be approved by the appropriate governing body. And we also want that if you're using any right-of-way that is, let's say, a rail, we want to have that confirmed in advance. You have to provide a match of 10.27% of the total program cost, project cost for federal projects. It's 30% for state-funded projects. And the applicant must commit to deliver the project within 3 years from the effective date of the agreement. And that's for federal projects as well. And I'm highlighting the federal projects because the next cycle is 100% federally funded. Next slide, please. So what types of projects can I apply for? There's project refinement, which is the first 30%. And this is similar to the TGM grants that was mentioned in the previous presentation. They inform future path. It's first 30%. What is the need? What are the alternatives? What are the potential environmental concerns? Estimate development and construction costs, and documenting community input and support. It's preliminary planning, and the way we say is the first 30% is there's a clause in the federal program that you have to construct the project within 10 years of receiving your first grant, or you have to reimburse the federal government for the money that you spent, the federal money. And by having this as a planning project versus a project design or pre-design, then that allows you to do your study. And if it comes up to say, hey, we can't do this, or we have decided not to do this, you're not obligated to reimburse the federal government. So we limit it to that first 30%. And then, of course, construction projects, which can run the gamut from preliminary planning all the way to construction, but it must have that construction component. Next slide, please. Who's eligible to apply? Local governments, school districts, tribal governments, transit districts, special government body, or other unit of local government. Nonprofits are not eligible for federal federal funding. They can partner with eligible entities for state funding. Next slide. And this is showing our schedule and what we have. The next solicitation is starting in August, and we're doing pre-applications. And from August 1st through September 15th, applications from November 1st through January 31st. Project awards will happen in July of 2023 after we do scoping and all the internal deliberation and recommendations and approvals. And then project executions will be October of 2023. 2023, which is the federal fiscal year. We have $18 million in federal funds. There may be some more from the federal bill that was passed. I've heard rumors internally it may be an extra $5 million, but I don't have anything confirmed at this point. So we're sticking to the 18 million available. We're rebuilding state funds for the 2024 solicitation. So this is federal, the next one, and then the one after that in 2024 will be federal plus state after we build those funds back up. Project refinement, which is that first 30% similar to TGM grant, is 150,000 to 750,000. We have a scope of work outline in the pre-application that will help applicants look at what we are looking for in that, and we're hoping that whatever you come up with in terms of scope of work and budget is consistent with that scope of work outline. And then construction is 500,000 to 6 million. That's an increase also from the last cycle because federal grants are very expensive to administer. And a lot of this is ODOT has to administer the grants unless the recipient is a certified agency. And there's only 10 of those in the state, if I recall, 10 or 11. And if you're not one of them, then ODOT will administer the contract for you. They will hire a consultant to do the work, and they will administer it. And the grant recipient's role is very limited at that point. There are some things that they can do, but that has to be agreed on in advance. Next slide. And this is the big one here. So we have a bunch of webinars coming up where we'll be discussing it, and we will be posting application materials in advance of these webinars onto the webpage so people can start going through. We have the solicitation the solicitation guidelines on our website as well. You have to email me to get registered for any of these dates. And so it's right there on the side, alan.l.thompson@odot.oregon.gov. And I will put you on the list. I'll give you the Zoom link. We'll give you the FAQ that we've developed. So you'll have a lot of advanced knowledge well in advance of these webinars. And look forward to discussing it further with you. Next slide, please. And that's it. I know I talk really fast, but that is my presentation. If there are any questions? All right, with
Thank
that.
you, Alan. I'm not seeing questions yet, but I will keep an eye out. And if anyone does have questions for Alan specifically, if you get them into the chat sooner or later, that would be great, because Alan is going to need to leave us before the possible till 1:15 extension. So if you have a question you want to get to Alan today, drop it in the chat and I will try to get that to him in the next few minutes. Before we go on to our next presenter, I just wanted to briefly give a quick review of RAISE grants through the United States Department of Transportation, kind of while we are on the subject of these transportation facility trails that serve as transportation as well as recreation facilities. The RAISE grant program through the federal government is an extremely competitive program, and it's all kinds of transportation projects, but we were really excited to see that nationally in the last cycle, 19% of the funding went to trails, which is pretty significant. And these are large grants. It's a $1.5 billion program. And so I wanted to flag it. I would love to see more RAISE applications for trails in Oregon. We had a successful one last round for the Council Creek Trail from Washington County. And the criteria for this RAISE federal program right now is really good for trails. The criteria is around safety, equity, climate, and sustainability. So trails should be really competitive with what the current criteria is. This is a program for public entities and is extremely important to have support from local and regional governments and ideally also your congressional representatives before going after one of these RAISE grants. Your community may be looking at RAISE for other big transportation priorities as well. So it's important to kind of do that outreach and have some kind of consensus on a trail project being a a priority for your community. And these are for big projects that have a real significant local or regional impact. They are eligible for planning and pre-construction activities. And I will post some links in our chat. There are some upcoming webinars about the RAISE program from both Rails to Trails and info sessions hosted by the US Department of Transportation. So would love to see some more RAISE grants for trails coming from Oregon, and wanted to share that before I pass it off to Janine to talk about a very different kind of trail program.
Well, welcome everybody. The Waterway Access Grant Fund is a program that's been around for about 19 months, so we're still very new. But we have two components, and the part I am going to kind of focus on is the part open to non-governmental organizations. And I'll mention briefly the infrastructure piece. So the goal of the Waterway Access is to really increase opportunities to experience non-motorized boating. Go ahead, Steph. And we can do it through two different ways. One is through the Waterway Access Grant competitive process, which has 3 grant cycles. There's no maximum requested limit, so you can apply for as much money as you think you need. I will tell you that we are currently in our 2-year budget, we get about $1.4 million. So not a lot of money, but like I said, it's a young program. Our targeted match is 25%, and those go in front of our board. So it's a timeline. It goes through a lot of review. And so that's one aspect. The other one is our small grant. And I flagged it as being revised because we are currently going through rulemaking to increase the maximum amount. So what you see here is for our anticipated new rule that, knock on wood, we don't have anything weird come up, should be in effect by the end of March. But we take these grants on a first come, first served basis during our 2-year budget. We generally have between $100,000 and $250,000 available. You can apply for up to $30,000 out of a maximum total project of 50. And match, this is a required minimum match of 25%, and our director can approve it. So I saw there was a question briefly pop up about docs. So NGOs can apply for, and I'm sorry, NGOs, non-government, just to make sure, I'm government, we use acronyms a lot. So NGOs can apply for education, training, opportunities, equipment. So if you have a club, a group, an organization, you can apply for kayaks, for helmets, for life jackets, for adaptive equipment. If you go to certain areas and there's gravel bars, you can apply for Moby mats to help with that transition to getting into the boats for water trails. You can apply to create things that help educate and promote. Some past grants we have funded have been Spanish language videos about life jackets, cold water immersion, boating under the influence. We've also funded some great projects where people have gotten out onto the water in a very meaningful way, because a lot of times it's a first opportunity for some communities to get out on the water. So we want to expand that. For the infrastructure, government entities, so cities, counties, ports, park districts, state, federal agencies, and tribal nations are eligible for on-site improvements. So we have 2 different pieces, and I would say if you're an NGO and you know a site that really could use with some non-motorized access improvements, let the site owner know that, encourage them to contact us to talk about funding. So there's two different parts. We want to help you get out onto the water as an NGO and to make sure that those opportunities are there. And then we have the infrastructure piece. So go ahead, Steph. Then we'll go to the next part. And so this is kind of highlighting some of the things that we're doing. And government can also apply for the education. So if you want to contract with an NGO to conduct some training opportunities or to operate something out of your park to promote those opportunities, you can apply and just contract with an NGO, or you can have an NGO do it directly. So I want to, encourage some creative things. This is a new program, 19 months old, and we are exploring different options of things. We've had a veterans organization. They've received a grant. Essentially, it's going to fund an outfitter guide, taking some mobility challenged veterans and veterans who are just needing to get outside and get on the water. We've got training where we have a community up in Portland where the lack of swimming is a barrier. And so we're going to help get some privatized swimming lessons to make them feel more comfortable being out on bigger water where they can't touch the bottom if they tip over. Contact me. We can have some great conversations, some creative ideas. And if you have any questions, let me know. So I know I went through that quick, but I wanted to leave as much time as we needed for any questions or responses to things.
Thank you, Janine. So we did have the one question about the dock. So to clarify, would a dock that provided access from kind of land trail to water access or to a water trail be among that eligible infrastructure for public agencies?
Yes, yeah. A governmental entity would be the eligible applicant, but NGOs are fantastic partners. It takes sometimes a lot of encouragement to get elected officials to make things a priority. So yes, docks to improve access on water trails are definitely eligible.
And we also have a question, Janine, of if there's a place to find the past funded grants from the Oregon State Marine Board to learn more about what's getting funded.
That is a great question. We're actually working on a story map, GIS map that will allow people to see what was past funded by different grant programs. It'll have some photos and a brief description. I didn't realize how challenging it would be to take some historic data and convert it into a new platform, but it is coming. I do have some spreadsheets that I could share out with Steph, and she can send it out as well.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna talk about just a few more opportunities and want to encourage folks, if you do have any other questions, to go ahead and submit those in the chat, and you can go back to our panelists for your answers. I also wanted to share about the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund. This is a program through the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Department that is funded through a mix of private donations and match from our legislature, as approved again in the last legislative session. So thank your legislators for voting in favor of this program. There's a deadline on February 25th, but there's also a new cycle beginning that will open back up again in July. So if you're just getting to know this program, you can take some time to get an application together, and it's for conservation and restoration, but it can fund trail infrastructure, specifically when enhancement or restoration of trails is done in a way that preserves sensitive habitat or resolves impacts to habitat. So if you're especially looking to improve a trail, make it more sustainable, this could be a great program. Or also if you're looking to fund an interpretive element of your trail, this could also be a good program. And like the programs Janine was talking about too, this Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund can also be used for programming. So if you, especially programming that is working with communities that have been underserved by previous outdoor recreation programs. They're relatively small grants. The maximum size is $50,000. So check that out if that one's new to you. There's been maybe 2 or 3 cycles so far. It's a relatively new program to Oregon. And there have been a couple of trail projects funded. We also have some information from Travel Oregon. They do not have information confirmed yet for the timeline of their kind of perennial competitive grant programs. They generally have small, medium, and large grant programs available. That information is still kind of getting confirmed for the current year. So the best way to learn more about their general grant programs is to sign up for their industry newsletter. Or if you just look in your browser under Travel Oregon Industry, you can find your way to their industry website. Travel Oregon, so yeah, they'll be determining the timing of their competitive grant program soon, but they also wanted to let you know about a new grant program that was authorized last session under Senate Bill 5561, which is grant funding specifically for guides and outfitters. That program is happening. The details are getting finalized now. So you can send questions about that program to Travel Oregon. The eligibility is pretty specific for folks who were registered as guides in 2020 and who had their income affected by COVID or drought or wildfires. So if that applies to you, want to make sure that you're aware of it so you can learn more. Or if it applies to your partners, pass on that information, please. And some other programs to explore for grants, because we can't cover everything today, but some other places to look to see what's available is your local metropolitan planning organization, or MPO. Specifically wanted to flag that the Portland metro area MPO has their flexible funds grant program and their kind of bike and pedestrian grant program. They're running a joint cycle, and that is open through February 15th. So that's coming up very soon. But also look at your soil and water conservation district or parks district, and also get to know your regional destination management organization. They often have funds targeted specifically to outdoor recreation projects as key to the local visitor economy. So if you have a project in mind and you haven't reached out to your regional destination management organization, do that. You can find a list of those on the Travel Oregon website. Rails to Trails Conservancy has a Doppelt Family Trail Development Fund to build and improve multi-use trails. They don't have information posted for 2022 yet, but that's something to look into. And then there's a number of outdoor industry, or private company grant programs. If you look at a lot of the outdoor brands, look at their kind of look for their community page. Or sometimes you'll see a grant page. Check these out. Some of them will fund infrastructure. Some of them will fund programs. Often they fund things with an educational element. And generally nonprofits are the ones eligible to apply for those, where depending on kind of other local grants, nonprofits or local agencies might be the eligible entities. So I wanted to just give one last big thank you to today's presenters before we jump into full Q&A. And I'll try to share some more links in the blog we talked about during that Q&A as well. And I wanted to flag again our next webinar that is specifically focusing on funding for trails on federal lands. Exactly a month from now, it will be March 9th at 12 p.m. So if you're looking for to do trail development or restoration work in that context, we hope to have lots more helpful information for you then. But with that, I will stop my screen share here and get the rest of our panelists up. And while I am jumping back in after presenting, I don't know if anyone else already saw a question in the chat you wanted to respond to while I do a scan. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, one thing, Steph, can you clarify if you'll be sending out copies of the slides to everybody or just the recording?
What we're going to share broadly is the recording, but if individual panelists don't have any concern with sharing presentations, I'm happy to share those PDFs with anyone who shoots me an email. I can send you a PDF as well. I'm seeing some nods and thumbs up, so I'll put my email in the chat right now. If you would like to look at those static slides, sometimes easier to grab info from, I know. We can do that.
Great. And I did see the question, I think it was to you, Janine, about youth camps. I'm not sure your answer though went out to all the attendees though. Might have just gone to us. If you want to repeat that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Jodi, because I wasn't sure either. I put something in chat, but yes, youth camps, outdoor schools, the non-motorized boating component is definitely eligible.
And I'm not sure if the youth camps was specifically a question for Janine, but for some of the programming, besides the program specifically talked about today, I do recommend looking at those private grants and from outdoor industry. A lot of those seem more geared towards programming than infrastructure. Well, we'll give it another minute or so if any other questions come in, but I think you all were such a font of information quickly shared that you answered a lot of questions before they were asked. We do have a question specifically about projects providing trail information as opposed to building and maintaining trails, specifically providing detailed information on trail conditions for people with disabilities. So maybe an educational angle. Does anyone have more information? I see Janine is waving.
So the Waterway access can do it, but of course it's focused on non-motorized boating. So if you have a water trail, it's definitely an eligible item for us.
Yep, and as far as our programs, if you're talking on the ground signage or kiosks, absolutely, all of our programs will be able to fund something like that. We've also, RTP has funded a couple different online interactive maps. Those have actually both been water trails, and that could potentially fall under the safety and education category, which we have some limitation on, but that's something as well that you could consider. So if you want to contact me, I'm happy to get more into the weeds with you on that.
I would also suspect that the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund might be a good fit for providing more inclusive information for trails, because that program has a real focused thrust on better serving folks who've had barriers to the outdoors. So I think that would be another good one to look into as well.
I would also say multilingual stuff is important to us. Anything that helps promote equity, inclusion, and removes barriers for people to enjoy the water is eligible for our waterway access funds.
Great. I see some hopes for some more links. I will let folks know that when I do post webinar recordings on the blog, I usually try to comb through all the major links shared during the webinar, and those will be posted as part of our kind of blog article. So I'll send out that link to the recording on the blog with those live links, so that when this webinar ends and you didn't grab anything, I should have that up in the next couple of days. So we want those links to be accessible for sure. That is a goal. We have a question about a program that would be the best fit for trail restoration for a nonprofit land trust. Anyone have ideas on that?
The Recreational Trails program would likely be a very good fit for that, because the only programs that OPRD operates on our recreation side that are open to nonprofit applicants is the Rec Trails program and then our ATV Grant program. So if those are non-motorized trails, then RTP would be the fit as far as the Oregon Parks and Rec programs. And I'll put my email in the chat as well.
All right. Well, big thanks again to all of our panelists. We will share this recording and all of these wonderful, helpful links on the Oregon Trails Coalition blog, along with a link to register for our March webinar as well. So I'll send a notice out to everyone who registered for today's webinar when that is live. So you have easy access to that. And thank you for joining us. Thanks to everyone out there for all the work you're doing for trail restoration and development. And big thanks to today's panelists for sharing so much great information. Really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.